I had actually prepared some introductory slides about the liability regime, but obviously I can skip these. I want to talk about liability of DNS registries and registrars, so the people like Nominet. But maybe it is good to give a very brief overview of how the technical system actually works, because I think most of you have heard about the DNS system, but how does it really work in practice? Well, you have just a few what you call root servers. They're hosted across the world. They are actually the start of the system. So if you would like to if you want to get the IP address of a certain website, say iCLICconference.co.uk, how does it actually work? Well, in theory, your laptop in which you paste this address in your browser, your laptop will ask will go to the root server and say, look, Mr. Root Server, give me the IP address of the server who is responsible for the .uk domain name. Oh, and the root server gives a certain answer with the IP address. Then the next query is launched. Then you will query that server and ask, look, give me the subdomain .go.uk. Which server is this? Okay, you get yet another IP address. You make a third request to the where you will ask, give me the IP address of the server that is actually hosting the content of iCLICconference.co.uk. Get another IP address. And then finally, you may get the content of the actual website. So there's a whole cascade of servers that are being queried. At least that's the theory, this cascade, because what happens in practice is there is a lot of caching going on, and there are a lot of copies being made, and all of this information, in order to diminish the burden on all these individual layers, there's a lot of copying going on so that you don't have to go through the root servers and then go to the other ones and go on and go on and go on. So the big message that you need to actually understand from this slide is that there's a lot of servers involved, there's a lot of copying involved, and a lot of layers in between. That makes it interesting, of course, because if you have a lot of targets to shoot at. And you can of course shoot on the hosting provider of iCLICconference.co.uk, but why not shoot at a higher layer? Why not shoot at the .co.uk, Nominet in this case? Or maybe, that's very speculative, why not shoot at the root servers? Because all of these are a much more effective weapon than shooting at the hosting server. Or maybe then shooting at the local the local internet access provider, because it's at the left bottom. Your local internet access provider also has a DNS server that caches copies all of this information. And so we know that there are a lot of takedown requests that are actually targeting big national internet access providers, but it's much more effective to shoot a layer higher, because if you take them down, then all of the ones lower in the chain will follow along. And so this could be a very, very effective weapon for, say, a copyright lawyer or a trademark lawyer who wants to take some certain website down. Now, it's a very, very drastic weapon because it takes down a lot. Not just the website, but possibly there's also email systems involved. Maybe there's nothing wrong with the emails that were being sent from that domain name, but they will also be targeted. Or maybe internal IT systems. If you target the company, nowadays a lot of software is being built on certain domain names that should be present and so on. You shoot at it at a higher level and it all goes down. So, very interesting weapon. Has it been used so far? No, not a lot. It's more theoretical at this moment, but there are a few cases that could cause concern. And you can also imagine that as from the moment that it starts to get known, and as from the moment that people like me start to advertise this kind of system, that people will actually do shoot at it in practice. And so we heard yesterday in the presentation from Nominet that you have that they do receive a lot of requests. Typically they are handled through the dispute resolution system. That's something completely different. That's typically an illegality inside the domain name. That's not what I'm talking about. So if you have an illegal domain name, like the pharmacy domain name that is infringing on a trademark, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm more talking about the actual content that is associated with the domain. So, what case law does exist? We have a very recent one in Sweden where actually the registry was held complicit, but because of its neutral role, eventually the court didn't punish the registry. We have it's a very case that causes concern. You have other cases that did not cause such concern in Germany and in France, where the neutral role of the registry was recognized. Now, interesting question is it actually protected by the liability regime? And I've really thought about it long and hard, and initially I was like, no, it doesn't apply to these kinds of service providers. But with a little bit of stretching, and actually not that much, but a little bit of stretching, you could actually, and so I kind of reversed my position there. And there is a general caveat. For example, most of these systems act at the national level. Typically, they are non-profits organizations, or they are maybe privately funded, but they are not a real company in the traditional sense. And you have the criterion that it should be about normally provided for remuneration, otherwise it's not a service in the sense of the e-commerce directive. So that's a general caveat. You could actually qualify them in the three categories. If you have a look, if you start from the technical perspective, are they mere conduit provider? Yes, you could argue, because they actually, there's a lot of transmission of information that takes place. And because their role is so super fundamental, you could even argue that they provide access to a communication network. Because without DNS, the entire internet falls down. And it happens from time to time that, and you see it really having a ripple effect across the internet. Caching service. Yes, for some of these DNS servers, you could argue that they are a caching service, because they actually, you know, all the temporary copying that goes on, all the caching, actually could qualify. Hosting provider, yes, as well, because they do host some information about the domain. You know, the name of the owner, some timestamps and so on, some security features as well. So, a bit of stretching, but actually I think now that it is possible to have them qualified as a protected hosting service under the directive. And then, of course, you have no general obligation to monitor, but the specific ones, which with all the questions that surround it, that follow. But even if you would say, you know, it doesn't qualify under the e-commerce directive, you could say that, you know, all this general EU law, all the requirements of, for example, the enforcement directive equally apply. Because, you know, it's such a drastic weapon that you could really wonder, like, is it actually proportional? Is it dissuasive and effective? Yes, no. You know, you have all these circumvention tools. You have the studies, we talked about it yesterday. You know, do people actually find the circumvention easy or not easy? You can really wonder about this. Must measures not be complex? It's pretty easy, and probably it's not costly to implement for just a few domain names. But as from the moment that the weapon would become actually common, and you get thousands of requests, then it becomes costly for typically small parties such as the registries. So then you could argue that the cost factor could become prohibitive. And then finally, measures must be prescribed by law. That's something that I wonder of why there is actually no more focus on this, because it's a very clear statement requirement in the directive, but a lot of national case national legislation doesn't comply with it, in my opinion. Because you have a very broad injunction possibility, could you really argue that it is prescribed by law if it's this general? That you actually, as a court, can take down a DNS registry or take down a specific domain name